Welcome to everyone. My name is Erica Poplinski-Burge. I was in the classroom for 18 years and taught every grade from pre-K to 8th grade. I have lots of experience with language teaching, and I am super excited to share that with you. Justin, do you want to introduce yourself before we jump in?
Sure, I'm Justin. I grew up in Vienna, Austria, and now live in Ann Arbor, Michigan, via Vancouver, British Columbia, and Los Angeles, California. I grew up speaking German and learning French in school, and I've been teaching some combination of Latin, Spanish, and/or German since 2005.
Excellent. All right, let's jump right in since we don't have a ton of time with the fundamentals of ways to teach a story. So what we're going to cover during our session is what's in a story. So like why are we doing it? What you can do before the story, what you can do during the story, and then what you can do after the story. So all the ways to teach a story. And there's so much in a story. From a language standpoint, the way that we acquire all languages, whether we're a baby acquiring our first language or someone older acquiring their second, third, and fourth language, is we start with individual words and phrases. And if you think of a baby, that's when they start to say like mama or dada or water, the very about a year of age. And then we build to sentences and brief interactions, like how are you? It's hot. And then from there to paragraphs and short texts, and finally to longer text and discourse. And this is just the natural progression of language learning for our brains, for all of us. And what Voces does is we kind of take advantage of this natural progression in our brains, while at the same time allowing us to get opportunities to discuss culture and open the doors to the world around us, which I think is one of the most essential things we can do as language teachers. And it also gives us opportunities for input for our students, output for our students, and interaction with our students, which we all need. Now, you will see that Voces is lined up to support this natural progression of language learning. Individual words and phrases can be found in the vocabulary section. And then with personal questions, you get your sentences and brief interactions. And people love talking about themselves. It lights up parts of their brain associated with reward, like dopamine. So getting your students talking about themselves and sharing their opinions is a great way to get the language into their heads. Then you have the stories, which in our level 1 text has paragraphs and shorter text because the students are just beginning their language learning journey. And these are both stories that give paragraphs and short texts. And then finally, you will also find that in the alternative version of the story, which we will show you momentarily. In the upper level titles like Nuestra Historia Tres, in addition to the individual words and phrases, the personal questions and answers, the paragraphs and shorter texts that you'll see here, you will also get the longer texts and discourses. And right in story 2, both with the alternative version and the main version of the story, you get longer texts and discourses. So we build our students up to be able to read these longer texts in a more natural manner. That is how the brain naturally acquires language, which is the way we should do things, really. Now we're going to talk about exactly what to do before you start a story to get the students ready for the paragraphs and short interactions and longer texts. With Justin.
Okay, yep, I'm all set. Give me 1 second. My internet actually cut out while you were speaking, Erica, and so I need to get back to where I was.
Would you like me to just share, Justin, or are you almost
I
there?
got it. No,
Okay.
I'm there. I'm there. That way you don't have to, I don't have to do the old next slide, please. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So,
Smart.
all right, here we are. Let me share my screen. Okay, is this showing? Is it showing now for everybody a screen? Huh, I wonder why it's claiming to be. What about now?
I believe now it will be. It's just taking a second.
Nope.
I see a piece of a screen.
That's so strange. All right, I gotta go back. This is bizarre. This has not happened before. Erica, feel free to continue to comment on your thoughts on doing stories with students while this is something about my screen. I've lost everything.
Okay, so Justin, let me know if you want me to just share the slideshow and we can do the next slide now, which is totally fine. One thing I alluded to when I was talking though is why the personal question and answers are so great for students. And that's because we talk about ourselves, the Harvard study shows that we talk about ourselves 60% of the time in conversation and 80% of the time on social media. And that's because it lights up parts of the brain that are associated with reward, the same as like eating chocolate or for me, drinking coffee would do. And so if you use the language to talk to students and to get to know students, not only are you giving them extra repetitions of the key target structures, but also you are getting them happy, making them happy in class and making them excited to be there. And you're also building community, because if you're talking about like, what pet do you have? Maybe your student has never talked to this other kid, but then they find out that that kid has a chameleon and they also have a chameleon. And so you start to get to know the connections that are between your students and build this amazing community, all while using the target structures. So personal question and answers, I highly, highly recommend. And Justin is going to get into those shortly here. Justin, are you ready, or are you ready for me to share my screen?
Let's try it this way one more time. What is
there
it showing?
It is.
Okay, I think this should work now. So thank you for that lovely introduction and for the extended introduction and taking over. So it's my pleasure to share a few of my favorite things to do as part of the build-up to the story. And whenever I think about preparing students for a story, whether it's in the Our Story curriculum, so Nuestra Historia, Notre Histoire, Nostra Storia, or Unsere Geschichten, depending on the language that you're doing, or whether it's pretty much any other text, a song that I'm going to be listening to with students, or the students are going to be listening to, a poem, you name it. I think about what are the key constructions, what's the key language in that piece of content, and also what are the themes or topics that I want students to be thinking about and kind of prepared to engage with. If it's some other kind of resource, I got to come up with those things myself. But in the case of the Our Story curriculum, we've come up with for you what is that key vocabulary, the key constructions, what are the themes, and so on. So I'll model a bit of how that might look with a specific story, and Erica will then continue with once you get to the story itself. So Erica already mentioned that kind of progression from individual words and phrases on through connected sentences and longer texts, and that'll be kind of embodied in what I and she demonstrate here as well. So I'm just going to share a couple of quick ways to lead into a story by introducing that vocabulary. The first of which is one that you may associate with sort of elementary classrooms or very introductory materials, but there's some ways to make it more interesting. And that is total physical response, which is at its most fundamental level is simply you say something, you, the teacher, say something in the target language, and students do something physical in response. It begins to establish that form meaning connection between the form of a word or expression, i.e. What it sounds like and or how it's spelled, and the actual meaning. And that making that connection over and over again is kind of the fundamental cognitive process that happens in language learning. So how does this look with the content and materials from Nuestra Historia? When we do physical response, like I said, establishing meaning, but that connection between form and the form of a word and its meaning. We're also kind of like connecting with students, even in something as rudimentary as TPR, and you'll get a feel for that as I share some of the sort of twists on TPR. Remember, we talked about this progression and the locus, the place you can do TPR anytime, but where we have it kind of designed for you is in this introducing the individual words and phrases that students will be using in a story. And the corresponding section within the short story section of an Our Story unit is the vocabulario importante section. I'll show some screenshots for the other languages as well. So vocabulario importante in the Spanish, vocabulaire important in the French, wichtiges vocabulaire in the German, and so on. Vocabulario importante in Italian as well. And this is the page that pops up when you click there, vocabulario importante in the Spanish. Again, vocabulaire important, wichtiges vocabulaire, this shows the other languages, so that we don't always submit to the hegemony of Spanish instruction as if it's the only language that we teach. So at the top of any vocabulary page, this is that same page that I showed just a second ago that has vocabulario importante at the top. You will have within an orange outline. In this case, the orange outline doesn't mean anything special. It's just, other than this is highlighted vocab. You may know that some of the other colored outlines do mean things in the curriculum. For example, if you see a box like this, but instead of green, instead of orange, it's yellow. That means that only you, the teacher, can see it. So it's kind of a teacher note. It won't appear in student accounts if they have accounts. But on this important vocabulary page, you'll see whatever is kind of key vocab for the story. Sometimes it's a multi-word expression, like a noun with an article, as you can see here with un muchacho and un lápiz. Sometimes, especially as students proceed through their learning, it's a lengthy sentence. But in TPR, basically, again, we're saying a word, students are doing some physical reaction. That doesn't mean that we have to say just an imperative instruction and they do that thing. A great way to start is just by saying, show me, and then whatever the word is. So for example, show me necesita. And if you wonder, like, okay, what are they supposed to show you? What I personally do almost always is I have students tell me, like, students, in order to help us remember necesita, we have, the connection of necessary in English, but let's come up with a gesture as well. And then I just invite students to suggest a gesture. Could I have folks who have their screen on suggest a gesture for necesita, for needs? As in, go ahead and with your hands. We don't have a lot of people with screens on. Okay, I love it. I see from multiple people this kind of gesture, which actually happens to be similar to the ASL sign for needs, which is roughly this. I'm not down to waist level in the video, but yeah, so this will be needs. And how about for tiene, for has? Someone want to suggest something? Okay, I see this right here, which this happens to actually be the ASL sign for has as well. So we have necesita and tiene. I'll just say to class when I'm first establishing that, okay, show me necesita. Show me necesita. You can do that in the target language as well, like muéstrame necesita, or if you're in Spain, mostradme necesita. They do the action, you verify that people are doing it kind of at full speed. Show me tiene. Lovely. And that's the most basic form. Now, the thing about that is it's boring. It's boring, especially if you only if that's all you do with it. And so there are ways that you can mix this up, both structurally, as far as how you structure your class, and linguistically. So for example, something I often do is I'll split the class into two sections. Oftentimes I'll name them after a city, or let students choose the name of a city or other type of location where the target language is prominently spoken. So let's say we had Bogota and Caracas, just randomly as a situation. Now I could say Bogota, just instruct that group. Bogota, muéstrenme necesita, and that group will do it while the other watches. And that even though that's simple, that does something worthwhile for the people who aren't doing the action themselves, which is they get to kind of witness from the outside, what does it look like? What does that form, meaning, connection look like? And then they can do it themselves when they're called on. I'll leave it at that for now because it's pretty straightforward. But in the hub, which has been mentioned a few times, I actually have a video with lots and lots and lots of ways to make that much more interesting, including starting with something like TPR and turning it into a full story that uses the words. But I'll leave it at that kind of for now, just to introduce the idea to you all of, look, we're starting with individual words. You don't have to come up with a gesture for every single word that students meet. But that's if you haven't gone back to the basics of TPR recently, I strongly recommend it. By the way, on the same page, there are other aids to introducing the vocabulary. So not only these couple pictures that you see on the screen right now, as in within the orange vocab box, but if you were to scroll down on this page, you actually, for every single one of these words, there's also a full illustration that you can either use just to remind people or give students another anchor of the meaning of the word, or you can even treat it as content and discuss the picture with students. So more on that later, or you can explore yourself, but that's another opportunity you have. So as we move along the progression then, again, this is what you see, vocabulario importante page that you see. As you move along that same progression from individual words and phrases to interactive sentences, including questions and answers, something that's a staple, a mainstay of my own classes, and that we also have a whole section for you, for which we also have a whole section for you in all the Our Story texts, is what's sometimes called PQA, or personalized questions and answers, which is basically what it sounds like, asking students questions about their lives and their opinions, but it has, there's some specific techniques that you can use to make that flow well. So I'll share a couple of those before sending it back to Erica to talk about once you dive into the story itself. And again, in personalized questions and answers, you're not only providing input in the language, the actual words that you're saying, but you're actually communicating with students and inviting them to communicate and giving them the tools to communicate using the language, as opposed to just having an exercise. In other words, not just exercise to practice saying certain words. We're actually genuinely interested in students' responses. And in addition to being better for language learning, that also helps in the process of community building, which is worthwhile for its own sake, and also creates a more positive environment for students to participate in. So again, if we come to our little recap of the sections within a short story section, you can see here now I've highlighted that the preguntas personales, or persönliche Fragen, domande personali, question personnelle in the other languages, that helps us along this bridge from individual words towards short texts. And so if you click on that preguntas personales page, what you see is, you'd see above this, the heading that said preguntas personales, but you have basically a slideshow. You can actually project this for students. I personally don't do that much because it's just text on white page. So you can also use this just as a resource for yourself. You can also lower down on this page. You can get a PDF that has not only the vocab like this at the top, but also all the questions and a bunch of guides for a bunch of specific ideas for how to follow up on those questions to generate genuine conversation with your students. But the first slide always just recaps the vocab that you already saw on the previous pages. And then there are all kinds of questions. Now, some of them, it's a stretch to call them personal questions, like ¿hay un libro en esta clase?, which means, is there a book in this class? And I ask very few of these. This would be part of just the most basic, making sure we're on the same page with the meaning of the words. What I do ask a lot of is the questions that are at the bottom of this particular slide, such as, ¿prefieres, as in you, the student, prefieres los libros de ficción, de ciencia ficción, de no ficción? Basically, what genre of books are you most interested in? For non-Spanish speakers, do you prefer fiction books, science fiction, nonfiction? And you could give a lot of other options there. Again, you could just ask those orally without any visual support, and maybe clarify on the board, or if students have questions, what you mean, and then have an actual discussion. So if a student says they prefer fiction books, go back and forth a lot between individual students in the class. Who else prefers ¿quién más? Who else prefers fiction books over, let's say, nonfiction? You can ask follow-up questions like, what's the most recent fiction book you read? Or what's your favorite fiction book? You can ask let's say you've asked one student that and another student that, and one student has said The Hunger Games and one has said Harry Potter. You can ask students to vote who prefers Harry Potter, who prefers The Hunger Games. So again, this is genuine Q&A. It's not just an exercise, but in the process, students are hearing over and over again, los libros, prefieres los libros, prefieres este libro a ese. and so on. So I'm able to do that off the top of my head, as you may be able to as well, but we still have given you that printable guide with those types of questions. This, for me personally, again, I spend often quite a bit of time, 10 or 15 minutes on questions like this, because it's a way to really quickly get genuine interactions, for me to gauge understanding before moving on to more complex textual stuff. Let me hand it back over to Erica for the transition from that into looking at an actual story that we provided for you then in the curriculum that uses this language.
Excellent. And so you covered so many important things, Justin. I used to, when I first started teaching with stories, because I went from being a traditional vocabulary and grammar teacher to teaching with stories, I used to just get right into the stories. But all of those things you are talking about are so important for getting students comfortable with the language, for getting extra repetitions in an interesting way, and for building community. They really, I mean, it's one of the cores of a classroom. So now we are going to talk about the things you can actually do with the story. And I'm going to talk about how to do a story with actors, how you can ask questions during a story, how you can do gesture reading. And then I'm going to briefly, because we only have 10 minutes left, talk about the alternative version of this story. So a story with actors, and this is a story that we've just shown you all of the total physical response and personal question answers for, is necesita. There's that TPR gesture that we all created. Necesita un lápiz, which is he needs a pencil. And here is the actual story with a picture. And one way to do this, especially if you have a classroom that is super interactive and you want to get students up and moving, is to have student actors. So in this one, I would have pick a student actor, someone who is going to be respectful and listen and do what you say, and students usually generally love to be actors, and get your student actor up here, and then you read the story and the student just acts it out. So I'm going to read it in English just out of respect for the fact that not all of us are Spanish speakers, but I would be doing this in Spanish in the classroom. There is a boy in Guadalajara, Mexico, and I will often have a map so I can point out where it is in the world. Students love to see that. He does not have a pencil, and he needs a pencil for class. So the student actor would be looking around. He'd be like, oh, I don't have a pencil. He might make like a face. And then he needs one for class. So he needs one for class. Maybe he's looking anxious. On the next page, then, it says he runs to his apartment, and then he runs to the class with a pencil. So I might even have just write up apartamento, apartment, on a side and put it on one side of the classroom, and write la clase on the other side of the room and put it on one side of the classroom, and have that student then run to his apartment and then run back to class with a pencil. Students really like watching student actors, and it makes it all very, very, very engaging. And then as you go, you can ask questions about it. You could say, did he run to his apartment or did he run to a restaurant? Did he run to his apartment or did he run to the movie theater? Did he run to get a pencil or did he run to get a book? So depending upon your level of students and how many repetitions, you can ask the students these questions as your student actor is acting it out. You can even make your student actor do some extra running, which students usually find to be amusing and gives you, again, extra repetitions of key vocabulary. So that is one way to do this story. And then you could do the whole thing with student actors. He doesn't have a book and needs one. He runs his apartment and he runs to class with a book. And then it turns out the class is physical education. He doesn't need a book. He doesn't need a pencil. And so it has kind of a funny ending. So that's just one way you could do this story. You could also do it with gesture reading. And gesture reading is where the students take those TPR gestures and then they do them as you read the story. So, hay un muchacho, there is a boy in Guadalajara, Mexico. He doesn't have a pencil. And your students are all acting out at the same time. He needs one for class. And then on the next page, he runs, so all the students will be running while sitting down, to his apartment, and he runs to the class with a pencil. And one of my favorite things about doing gesture reading is you can see really well who has already made those connections between the gesture and the word, and who's kind of like looking around to see what the gesture is. So that kind of is a really quick way to authentically assess where all of your students are at without actually having to sit down and assess them individually. So gesture reading, again, is a great way to take advantage of that TPR that you just did with your students. And we already talked about asking questions. You could ask questions about anything in the story. Yes or no questions are really nice for beginning students, so they can just do thumbs up or thumbs down. It makes it a really easy and like non-threatening way to answer questions. But of course, if your students are ready, you can have them answer out loud as well. I like to raise my hand and say raise your hand in Spanish because I was a Spanish teacher when students are expected to raise their hand. And I like to do this when students are expected to call out because it makes it very comfortable for students because they know exactly what you're expecting. That's a trick I learned from John Cowart many years ago. And then finally, so that I don't eat up all of Justin's time, because we do have post-story activities to talk about as well, we have an alternative version to the stories in the series. And the alternative version just tells a story from someone else's point of view. And from this alternative version is from the student's point of view. So instead of there is a boy who forgot the pencil, I am a boy from Guadalajara, Mexico. I am a student. For my class, I need a pencil, but I don't have a pencil. And there's so many things you can do with this. You could give this to your faster processors or your heritage students who already speak the language and just tell them to read it. You could have students match with the sentence to the picture. You could just have them read it and point out, oh, he is a boy is es and soy is I am, and point out the differences so they start to get that extra language. But it's just lots and lots of I was reading the chat. There's lots and lots of juice and meat that you can get out of a story. And Meredith asked if I can repeat the gesture you need to elicit an oral response. I just do like this, like everyone yell at me. When I do this, the kids know they're going to yell out the answer. And when I raise my hand and say, raise your hand, they know that they should raise their hand for the answer. Great question. I'm going to turn it over to Justin so I don't eat up the rest of our time because there are some great things left to do with what to do after a story.
Aha, I think I was muted. Is this showing what I want to show, the fundamentals, post-story activities on the top right, and then 4 bullet points with stars? Okay, just a thumbs up or a verbal yes so that I know we're on the right page. Okay, lovely. So once a story's over, it's so tempting, as in once you've read through a story, it's so tempting to just move right on, whether it's to quiz students on something or move on to the next story or some authentic resource you want to do with students. But really, there's so many ways that we can milk that recent interaction with a story. The fact that students have a story fresh in their head, both to really, really, really solidify the language in students' brains, and also to get them using the various modes of communication. So they've done some interpretive during that story reading process. We can do some more interpretive activities and also interpersonal and some presentational ones. And so that's what doing the Voces activities and post-story activities is all about. Now, what we mean here by Voces activities is the activities that are literally the next items in the menu after the story itself. And I'll show some examples of those. Comic strips is a pretty straightforward thing where students basically create a storyboard of the story, but we have templates for you in the resources section in every one of the Our Story titles with both a 4-panel and a 6-panel comic. And a reader's theater is another way to act out stories. So Erica mentioned reading a story in the first place with student actors. Reader's theater is another way to stage the stories. For time reasons, I'll probably share a couple of these Voces activities and then refer you to the hub for lots more. Oops. So you have here the top left again, that same menu that we've seen already. And after necesita un lápiz, you see about halfway down, almost exactly halfway down, necesita un lápiz, that's the story page itself that Erica just took us through, that had the pictures and the text of the story. There are several actividades, or whatever the word for activity is in the other languages. And some of those are actually gradable activities. Some of them are even automatically or self-graded. If you see this lightning bolt within a circle. That means that you can generate, it can generate a score that both you and students see. And these are scaffolded. So the first couple activities are pretty straightforward comprehension type activities. And then it moves on to more interactive things like in Escucha y en Pareja and a couple others. So again, I'll show you some screenshots of a few of these, and you can feel free to poke around yourself, or we can walk you through in a video in other sessions or in other interactions. So this would be, if I clicked on opción múltiple here, multiple choice, it would take me or take students, if they have accounts, to this activity. This is a good time to mention, a lot of teachers just have an account for themselves, and they might project this and have students tell them what to put and do this more interactively. A lot of teachers and a lot of schools, students have their own accounts, and so they can log in and do this kind of work either in class or at home. On almost all the post-story activities, the actual text of the story is reproduced at the top of the page, so students can refer to it, so that it's not like a memory test or a memory exercise. And then students can see the activities themselves, or do the activity itself. Just like in the, I don't know if you've noticed this before, but just like in the stories where there's sometimes blue text that students can hover their mouse over, and a pop-up translation will come up. If there's a new word that maybe didn't come up in the story or hasn't yet come up in the curriculum, students can hover over a blue word like that for a quick English translation. It doesn't happen here because this is just a slide, not the curriculum itself. Here's an example of true or false rather than multiple choice. You can proceed. This is the Escucha y en Pareja activity that you saw on the menu. Basically, what students do here is they would click the play button to hear an audio description, and then that would be usually a line straight from the text early on. Sometimes it's a line with a similar meaning later on, and then they would select which image, which illustration corresponds to that. So just wanted you to see here that really just pre-made simple stuff that you can give students to do, and then proceeding on to more activities that stretch students a bit more. Like here, we only have the first picture reproduced in this screenshot, but if you were to scroll down, several pictures or illustrations from the story are present. And this activity type, because it would kind of break the activity, does not have the text of the story at the top. Instead, students actually come up, and it might end up being worded the same, but students can come up with their own thing, their own text to put here. And I just want to emphasize here that for me, often, I've always, for a long time, been teaching with stories in some way or another. But before I had access to Voces, spent so much time coming up with like slideshows that do this, or typing up pages that do similar activities. And so having so much stuff pre-made, there's more than you're likely to use, unless your students are super fast. The idea, and you may have gotten this impression already in some of the other sessions, the idea is not to overwhelm you or students, but to give you so many potential activities that you can use so that you won't run out. You will not run out of stuff to do with these, with the content in general, and with the Voces activities in particular. Really quickly, as an example, I mentioned that we have these pre-made templates. This is an example for comic strips. So, and we have this for all the languages. Students would draw here and write a caption. Lots of other activities like these. I'll skip for now readers theater and student acting related things, and instead tell you that you can find that and lots of other guides, either written or actually video demonstrations that Erica and I have done on these, and probably hundreds, but if not, then close to 100 different activities. So if you open the hub, and Erica mentioned, or Aaron early on showed one way to do that, we can show you all the ways to access the hub, because we reference it so much and are sending you there so often. Want to make sure you can get there. But you can see where it says story script extension activities, you have here in text a bunch of different activities. If you were to click and expand the self-guided training tutorials, there are sections in there with Erica and me doing video demonstrations, not just of the couple activities that we've shared about here, but with tons of others. And these are, tightly scripted, tightly edited videos. So they use your time well, like a 3-minute video with a bunch of different story activities or post-story activities and so on. So make sure that you check those out. These are just examples of what all these look like in the hub. So I think I'm not going, just for time reasons, I think I'm not going to go through this entire how to access the hub slideshow, but we will make sure that you have plenty of information to do that when the time comes. Is this still, is this showing you a thank you screen with questions and whatnot? So there's a good chance you have questions from doing this, whether they're about the curriculum, whether they're about some of the techniques that we mentioned. Make sure to join us in the Q&A session that's in about half an hour if you want to ask some of those questions. You can also submit questions using the daily survey that someone either has already linked or is about to link in the chat. And as you've heard in all the other sessions, we spend a lot of time having one-on-one meetings or meetings with departments, showing them, answering very specific guided questions and doing walkthroughs of the curriculum and things like that, if that's something you want to do. I'm not Erin Almoranti, but you can still email her at erin@vocesdigital.com. For me, it would be Justin SB. For Erica, Erica PB. So basically our first name and other initials plus vocesdigital.com. And in case you haven't gotten the impression yet that it might be worth your time, explore the hub. So many more activity ideas that you can use with the Voces content and with any other text, stories, songs, poems, articles, you name it, that you like to use in your classes. So thank you all. And you don't even have to figure out what room you want to go to next. You also don't have to figure out who you want to listen to next. It's going to be me in this room right here, assisted by Hannah. But I'm going to give us about 1 minute to get a breather. I'm going to recharge my water. You can tell I'm thinking in other languages here, like charger, as in to load up, to reload, refill your glass. But go ahead and get a refill. Go ahead and get a breather. And in 1 minute, I'll proceed with the authentic communicative tasks and IPAs. I fear